Good afternoon from Sacred Space at Titania's Realm. It's 12:48 p.m. on the 10th of March 2025, Monday. Let me just check. Lost a day. Monday. Yes, indeed it is Monday. So, to all intents and purposes, for me personally here at Holland Park, the cyclone and the residual effects are over, unless some more very, very catastrophic wind should blow up again. Power was restored here at 4 minutes to midnight, which I found interesting that it went on during the middle of the night. And because I'm heavily, or more to the point, highly trauma activated from all the fighting my way through the cyclone alone while under threat by maniacs pre-cyclone, my body, my mind and my body went into full-blown post-traumatic activation last night, so I couldn't sleep. So I was lying there with my CPAP mask. I only missed one night, fortunately, so I can't have had my CPAP mask on yet because there was no power. Anyway, I was lying there sort of snoozing but not really asleep when I heard the beep that my power board makes when the power goes back on. So I was like, oh, thank the goddess. So I immediately jumped out of bed and went to the esky where I was storing all my frozen food, as much of my frozen food as I could fit out of the freezer, and threw it all back in the freezer. So I'm grateful because I wasn't able to do, my normal shop on Tuesday before the cyclone hit because of greedy, selfish, cunted, spoilt white privileged. Did I mention cunts that I live amongst here in Queensland who literally stripped the shops bare, so left me with bare minimum food. So anyway, I worried a lot about what happens when all my food goes rotten, because I don't know when the food resources will be returned to normal either. And anyway, so at midnight I'm jumping out of bed and throwing things back in the freezer and thanking God and all the gods and the goddess for literally saving me, so at least I've got enough food for a few more days. Actually, it's a bit more than a few more days. It was like 4 packets of mince and a whole chicken and other bits and pieces. So that'll tide me over, really, for at least a week. But I will have to go out and buy the infamous toilet paper if any's ever available again, and vegetables and milk and just basic stuff. So I've weathered the cyclone remarkably well, given I panicked a lot about not having enough food. And before we lost power, I even baked a loaf of bread because I didn't have any bread left in the freezer. So I've been a good little housefrau, domestic goddess, and soldiered myself through. But of course, my nervous system last night just completely derailed, as it does. I have after decades of cumulative trauma, I have a well-entrenched mental habit that I don't break down until it's all over, till I'm safe. So as soon as I noticed the mental spiralling and the insomnia and the constant worry, I was like, Tony, you're safe now, why are you doing this? And then I realised post-traumatic stress syndrome, it's a thing. It's my diagnosis, people. So I realised, oh yes, now that you feel safe and the power's on and there's no damage around the house and garden, everything's all right, and all the other neighbours are living all very quietly in their homes, so there's no actual perceived threats. My mind decided to crack up. So this morning I took a Valium, which I hate Valium, and my Valium is actually 8 years out of date because I weaned off all psych meds in June 2016. So I took one just to help me sleep this morning, knock me down a little bit. because if I don't get any sleep, then I can get a little bit, the definition of cray-cray, of crazy, as in hypomanic states and pressured speech, and, can become quite unwell very dramatically. So a Valium was in order, and I took my Valium and was having a nice cup of tea. And my cousin Megan messaged me, and she's also has some stressors going on with her in New Zealand. She said, I've taken 2 Valium. I went, really? I've taken 1. What is it with the Phillips clan and our very precarious nervous systems? But we were raised by dangerous maniacs to all intents and purposes, so we're a bit, when it comes to our nerves, we can be a bit fragile. If we push too hard, as I've been pushing myself for months, then the unravelling at the end can be, imagine a mechanised car that's been pulled back and pulled back and pulled back, and all that energy built up and built up and built up, and then you suddenly let go. It's catastrophic. So we Phillips women, my cousin Megan and myself, although I still go by my father-in-law's name after 40 years, we hold on to our nervous systems like a carefully calibrated piece of well-oiled machinery. We surf our moods and we surf our diagnoses remarkably well now that we're older women, because the getting of wisdom, and kind of you have to manage it. So we did rather well, and we had a good long chat, and it was lovely. And then she went off to have her shower. I went off and had my shower after I had a good long nap this morning. So I'm a bit more mentally clear and feeling a little bit less catastrophic and dark and gothic and moribund, and the stuff. A certain person that watches my videos who's a mental health professional knows exactly the stuff that I go into when I fall into the abyss. Well, Mama T has dragged herself up by the years, and every day, and in the coming weeks, puts this event behind us, and gradually our minds and hearts and emotions will settle, and we'll heal. Why is that driving me mad? That's a bra strap. We'll heal, and we'll come back into some kind of equilibrium again, which I'm looking forward to, babies. Anyway, I was going to read to you what I wrote on Instagram, but no, I won't. If those of you who are on my Instagram already read it, and those of you who are on my YouTube get to see me in my videos expressing myself, so we won't pile on with the same energy ad nauseum, because it's, in a way, it's once it's out there, it's dealt with. I've expressed myself. It's out like a giant floating turd in a sea of effluent. Pope Alice used to spray paint dog turds gold on the streets of Toowoomba because he was an artist and could. I'm not going to spray paint my turds gold, because a turd is waste matter, and when it's gone out of you, it's gone forever. Bye-bye! In the sewage treatment plant, and whatever they do with that, turn it into fertiliser or whatever, one can only surmise as then becomes their purview, and I don't hold on to smoking turds is what I'm saying. Let it go, and wherever it lands, someone else has to deal with it. Turn shit to spiritual gold, am I right? Well, we've had a lot of shit lately Mama T, the psychedelic dreamer that Tanya's gone through. A lot of very nasty shit. Women fingering her in the club 2 nights before Charlie's death. Then Charlie's death on Australia Day, that was intense. And all these other little weird fucking games and setups and ignominies and cruelties, and on it went. Bing, 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 bing. And I've sailed through it all, babies. And then we got slammed with a cyclone. But however, had nothing to do with me personally, but I did call upon the wrath of God 2 weeks ago because I'm bloody psychic and was probably already intuiting the gathering storm as I do sometimes months ahead. Right on cue, babies. So we've had now the wrath of God sprinkled itself all over Brisbane, the Gold Coast, Byron Bay, up as far as the Sunshine Coast. Fraser Coast copped a very bad storm on Saturday night as well. We've had the wrath of God, and now we've got the clean up from the wrath of God, and we've had the good cleansing in a way. Winds blowing all that evil and viciousness and negativity right out for transmutation. Got to put a spin on it. Got to turn shit to spiritual gold, people. And anyway, at the end of the day, let me just publicly state I'm grateful that I was protected and my little house here is safe, and there's flooding under the house, but it's nothing of any real value there, and it's all washing away as it does. And yes, I've been kept safe, even with the power going back on was such a great relief. I really only went without it for 30 hours, but that 30 hours, it's astonishing how dependent I am on my social media and my connectivity, because it got very stress inducing after a few hours of not being able to check things and communicate with people. But it was a good practice on having a proper digital detox, and I might even try and consider, but I probably won't because I know me too well, but I should actually make an effort to 1 day a week completely switch off my phone and all connectivity and have a digital detox. Just be at one with nature and be a real human animal, and have that feeling of that primal feeling of not actually having contact with the outside world, not know what's going on. In desperation, by 1 o'clock yesterday afternoon, I went and sat and turned my car on and charged my phone up that way, and it was good in a way because I listened to the radio, and so I was having human voices in my ear giving updates on the actual, flooding and the residue of ex-cyclone Alfred. And isn't that ridiculous when I have people in every house all around me, but I have to revert to a radio being broadcast from some radio station somewhere because people are that fucking disconnected now. It's also a very chilling thought. But anyway, I sat in my car and I listened and even sang along to some of the songs that they put on the radio, and it was very comforting. But it just shows you how addicted I am to the internet and broadcasting. And yes, having my phone charged gave me a bit of a sense of calm again, Honestly, it's quite terrible. Every now and then I throw wobblies and go, I'm going to go and live off grid because I hate humans, you're all poison and you're all fucking dangerous, which to a certain degree we all are, all of us. Maybe I'm not quite as much poisoned as most of you, but I'm still poisoned. And my cousin and I were discussing that we've both got water filters, and She got given a very expensive, beautiful pottery one and isn't using it. I said, are you mad? It costs about $300-400 here in Brisbane. You need to be using it. So she said, but it takes up so much space. I said, that's all right. Sacrifice one corner of your bench. A very good quality water filter, and it's good to filter your water. I only have a shitty little jug. Oh, anyway, I might look into buying one of those nice fancy water filters actually. But everything runs to money. Money, money, money. Life is funny in a rich man's world. But in a cyclone like we had with the winds whipping everywhere, money makes no fucking difference if you're about to lose life and limb and your home. And I mean, look, even that psychopath panicked by throwing his box trailer in front of my house, thinking he was protecting his family and that I was expedient. Am I right? This is the logic. All the money in the world he thinks he has can't save him if shit really went down. I hope he got that message. I hope he understood that no, the latest Lexus won't help you in a tornado or a cyclone or a flooding event. All the gold and diamonds, unless you have it stored away in some storeroom, flood-proof storeroom, shock-proof storeroom somewhere, won't help you. Can't really do much with it if there's no food in the shops anyway. And our government, I believe, deliberately withheld food this time. It was an outrage. It was an absolute outrage. So we'll see if there's food in the shops in the next few weeks. I'll be monitoring that carefully. So it's something I'm going to go to war about. It's a very dangerous thing to do because it targets the poor, the homeless, people like me on disability pensions who don't have a lot of money, so rely on that bit of food being in the fucking supermarket. No, the rich come and take it all. Well, let's eat the rich. It's time for a revolution, babies, aka the Russian Revolution. That's how that got started off, by the way. People were starved out by the aristocracy. So they had a gut full of being starved out, and really most of the people were indentured slaves, serfs to all intents and purposes. And the biggest mistake was they didn't look after their poor and starved them. So there was a revolution. And if it keeps going on like this here in Brisbane, Australia, there'll be another revolution. I threatened that in 2020. It's amazing how quickly all the politicians, oh, really? Oh, let me check. Oh, there's plenty of food in Woolies and Coles. I said, no, there isn't. I had to go to Aldi to get food. The Germans were still supplying food, not our Australian companies you want us to support out of patriotism. Same deal this time. I'm pretty sure, though, I didn't bother going to Aldi because as soon as I saw the stripped shelves, I thought, here we go. This is exactly to the date a repeat performance. Just a different scenario being a cyclone, am I right? But the behaviours, the top-down effect from the government, the same. Although I have to say there was a much better response to the cyclone than there has been in previous years. So that's under a Liberal government. Liberal, my vowed enemies. I'm very impressed, actually. I still won't vote for them. I won't vote for any of them ever again after what they did to my species with the COVID epoch. They are not trustworthy. They were all dishonourable, and all they cared about was this. But I am moderately impressed with, is it David Crisafulli or whatever his name is, spoke eloquently and kept very calm and was very practical through this cyclone. So I will take a note of who can behave himself like a gentleman and a man of honour. Won't vote for him on principle, but I have taken note. So there is that. What else can I tell you? Sun's pushing its way out through the clouds and the turkey's running around the front verge. So things are very calm here at Sacred Space Titania's realm. So on that note, I thought I would continue on reading from The Dream Fighter and Other Creation Tales by Ted Hughes. We're up to a story called The Invaders. I might just grab some water because I haven't even started yet and my throat's already closing up. I'll be right back. Alright, beautiful people. Here we go, go, go. Go, gadget, go. In the deep darkness, God suddenly raised his head and listened. What was that? Was it a voice? He strained his ears, listening into the silence. Whatever it was, it had wakened him up. The silence was thick as if made of dense leaves. All through the world, just like God, the creatures listened. Some that had been sleeping had jerked awake, their eyes bulged wide and moist in the pitch black as they listened. Some that had been creeping froze, with one paw lifted, their ears craned. All were listening, all were astonished. It had been a new noise, like nothing before. And though it hadn't been very loud, every ear had heard it all over the earth at the same moment, as if it had come from the inside. Oh, my nose is so itchy, it's driving me mad. And now, as they listened, and just as those creeping creatures were thinking of putting their lifted paw silently down, the sound came again. It was a voice. It was words. It said, I am taking over. It didn't come from inside. It came from far out in space, but from everywhere in space at the same time. A peculiar, hoarse, quiet, howling voice. How can a howl be quiet? But it was. It was a sort of howling whisper, or a whisper, a harsh, thin whisper with a howl far away down inside it. Very eerie. All creatures on earth looked straight up into space to see what it might be. That night was starless. Their gaze disappeared into complete black. God, at his window, stared up into the perfect black. And again the voice came, louder and as if angrier. I am taking over the earth. All creatures shall be my slaves and my food. God shall be my slave. I am coming to enslave the earth. I am coming to enslave and devour you all. No. That's not in the text. I just had the urge to take the piss, Didn't I say earlier about eating the rich? Nommy. I've got nothing against people being rich, by the way. I used to be richer, slightly richer. It's nice to have money and creature comforts. It's not nice to just be a selfish fucking narcissistic gimp though, that deprives other people of their basic requirements because you're just a greedy cunt. That's what I'm against. Greed and corruption and selfishness and evil and narcissism and psychopathology. Why am I against that? Because it's how I ended up poor over and over again. Other people's viciousness and ignominy. But I won't be bitter or anything. We'll just carry on reading the story. Nom. Right. I don't know why. But my aircon's it's working, but it's just not doing very bloody much. A terrible silence followed. God's skin had tightened with goose pimples. Isn't he meant to be all powerful and omniscient and omnipotent? And why is he scared of some voice that says he's going to devour him? What happened to the good old-fashioned smiting? Oh, wait a minute. Suspend belief and carry on with the story, Tanya Aarons. Yes. Quite right. God's skin had tightened with goose pimples, and his hair was trying to stand on end, struggling in its matted curls. God doesn't brush his hair, apparently. I did run a comb in the shower. I've got to be careful because I'm losing quite a bit of hair at the moment, which is a worry. Anyway. Who was this? What was this? A voice from beyond. And what else? Had he made the earth too beautiful? Had he made all his creatures too beautiful? Had he attracted the greed of some space being? Some horror, perhaps. It sounded as if he had, and it was coming. But prescient, isn't it? It's sort of how I feel during the COVID years, like something invaded us and it's still coming. It sent its little forerunners out and we're waiting for the mothership, the rest of the ignominy to arrive. It's frightening, quite frightening, especially the neurological and physiological changes in the population all around me. Very frightening. And there's nothing I can do about it but survive, as I have always done. Barely, at times, survive. Right, people of Earth, we will all survive if we're stubborn and resourceful and have good, kind people in our team to support us all. We will all survive. It's a given. Nothing is ever completely lost unless you give up. So there is that. Right, beautiful people of planet Earth, As he stood there at the open window, meaning God, he heard the little cries of fear beginning, whimperings, caterwaulings, whinings, screeches, moanings, chitterings, snufflings, roarings, wailings, mooings, and bleatings. All the voices together, a sea of sounds that grew louder and wilder, till the whole earth was crying out. He listened in dismay. What could he do? That voice from space had terrified the whole earth. Panic was beginning. A sounder of wild pigs went plunging through his gooseberry bushes, barking and squealing. A great horse was churning to and fro on his lawn. He could hear it in the dark, whinnying and grunting and whining and shaking its nostrils. He could imagine its staring, frenzied eyes, its mane on end, its tail stump stuck straight up, and the long tail flaring from it as it whirled about in terror. Foolish horse. He cupped his hands to his mouth and bellowed with all his strength. Quiet out there! Quiet! There's no reason for alarm. Have no fear. God is here. It's a false alarm. That too was heard all over the earth, but it travelled slowly, like waves widening from a rock dropped in a pond. It swept around the globe. Hearing it, the creatures became quiet. Was God going to make a speech? Was he going to explain? Was he going to make it all right? Soon the whole earth was silent once more, listening now for God. And God was thinking, it's weird. Oh, it must be coming off my camphor table. I was going to say I can smell like tea tree oil and eucalyptus. It must be the table. It just came all of a sudden, this waft of eucalyptusy strange smells. Is it the table? Yeah. Doesn't always smell, so it's odd. Right, where was I? Distracted by my camphor laurel table. And God was thinking, I'll just give them a few comforting words, when that other voice came again. So all the creatures, listening in silence for God's words, heard instead that horrible, howling, screeching whisper from space, from the very stars it seemed to be, but from all the stars together, from every hidden star, at the same time. And it said, I am coming. Listen, O slaves. I am your new master, and I am coming. I need blood. I need food. And you, God, you poor little God, you shall be my back scratcher. The voice was no longer a whisper. It sounded a whole lot nearer and bigger. It was a bigger, fiercer voice. Just the voice, quite apart from what it said. The voice alone was terrifying, and the wild laugh made the ground shiver a little. At once, every creature closed its eyes, opened its mouth to the limit, and emptied its lungs. From the whole earth, one great cry went out. The din was deafening. Sounds a bit like Cyclone Alfred, doesn't it? God slammed his window shut and went groping for a candle. His fingers were trembling. How long before sunrise? How fast was this voice approaching? It was obviously coming pretty fast. But space is big. He found his candle and lit it with a snap of his fingers. He sat on his bed and clutched his hair and tried to think while outside his window the earth wailed and sobbed, and up in the darkness, what? God's eyes rolled upwards, and he listened. Just want to show you all the animals wailing, which would be a very terrifying thing. All the animals in the world all wailed at the exact same moment. It was a terrible dawn for the creatures. God walked out in the dew, doing what he could to calm them. All the smaller creatures tried to get into his clothes, to hide near him, up his trousers, inside his shirt and his sleeves. And as he walked, he looked like a walking bee swarm with all the animals trying to land on him for safety. The bigger animals had gathered around God's house. Even elephant and lion and leopard were in a shocking state, especially their wives. God called a meeting. This voice in space, he began, is very odd. All the creatures fell silent. Even the flies landed and listened. Yes, it is very, very odd, said God. Most peculiarly odd. I might have to treat myself some more mullein tea. It's like a little bit of movement down there in the chest. Not pleasant, but necessary. Been pretty good the last day or two, considering Cyclone Alfred and all the other shit that went down. Nothing like an adrenaline rush, life, death, life, fighting for your survival to kick sickness away for a few days, but it's still kind of lingering and it might come back with a vengeance if I don't address it. They all gazed at him, full of trust. Must be wonderful to be so powerful that all living creatures trust in you. Surely God would know what to do. Surely he would protect them. But he simply stood there, scratching his beard and frowning and saying, very, very, very odd. And again he frowned sternly. Buffalo suddenly saw that God didn't know what to say. He didn't know what to do either. God was as baffled as they were, and Buffalo was just about to shout, "We ought to get ready to fight," when the sky seemed to split. All the creatures flattened, as if a giant hand had slapped down on them. Their eyes were squinting tight shut, their ears flattened, their jaws clenched as the voice came from directly overhead. The same voice, but now very loud, like a great clangor inside a huge iron ship. Surrender! I call on you all to surrender. You are in my power. It's already too late to fight. Only God still stood upright. He lifted his fists and shook them at the morning sky, which was bright blue, a beautiful morning with a few fluffy clouds in the west, which is over there. Do your worst, whoever you are, he roared. We're ready for you. Do your worst. We're ready. Didn't sound ready at all to me, did he? It's calling a bit of a bluff there. But then he's God. Maybe God is always ready. I mean, who can understand the mind of God? I certainly don't. It's not for us to understand anyway. The answer from the skies was a long, howling laugh, and then, prepare! I shall be on top of you before you know. Prepare! Countdown has begun. God waited. After a few minutes, when nothing happened, he roused the animals, and now working in a fury, he began to arm all his creatures. Excuse me. Have no fear, he called, as he fitted tusks to the elephants. Go and practice with these. The elephants surged off and began to practice on big trees, levering their roots out of the ground, ripping their bark off. What weapons, they cried, and threw their trumpets. Every creature pressed towards God, crying for weapons. The wild pigs stormed off like a charge of cavalry. Their jaws had been fitted with short, hooked tusks, as sharp as razors. They slashed through a field of turnips, making the slices fly. The wild bulls trotted off, knotting their tails, looking deadly under their new horns. We're the land rockets, they boasted, when his tanks appear. Watch us! And they shook their heads, so that the horns seemed to spin like propellers. His fingers flying faster than a typist's, God fitted weapons to every creature. The rhinoceros bounded off in his armour plating, tossing his long horn upwards. Where's the enemy? He shouted. Let me topple his towers. That's better, snarled the leopard, and he made such terrific swipes with his new bunches of claws, like clubs full of steel hooks, that some nearby tall flowers fainted and became creepers ever again. Even the rats and mice scampered about, clashing their fangs, dying to come to grips with the enemy. Everything felt safer. Pretty soon they were all equipped and all longing for the fight. Let me at him, boomed the bear, and he took a swing at a tree stump which actually exploded, just as if he'd tossed a bomb into its roots. God called his army of new warriors. "It's no good being well armed," he shouted, "if we've no discipline." Then he showed them how to form round him in a square, the biggest and most dangerously armed creatures on the outside, the smaller and quicker creatures inside. God stood in the middle of the square. His main weapons were blinding lightning and thunderbolts. He kept in reserve earthquakes and volcanoes. He also had mists, hail the size of oranges, and tornadoes which could lift up weights bigger than elephants and whirl them far out to sea. He had incredibly freezing winds that could refrigerate most enemies solid in about 5 seconds. His last resource was meteorites. He was slightly afraid of those. The damage they could do, he knew, was out of this world. But he'd practiced a lot on the moon and knew he was pretty accurate. It was a last resort. Cut my life into pieces. This is my last resort. And so on and so forth. Papa Roach. I didn't used to know that it was Papa Roach that sang that song, but that's one of my favourite moshing songs. Right, anyway. The creatures stood in their places, gazing upwards. God gazed upwards. The elephants stood fast, swaying like boxers and making little lunging movements with their tusks. The lions lifted their upper lips. The leopards made sure their jaw muscles were loose. But God was worried. He'd put heart into all his creatures, giving them weapons. But he still had no idea just what this enemy might be. Its voice had made him feel quite sick with anxiety. He had a feeling it was going to be some battle. He was already thinking, the moment it appears up there in the sky, I'll have a go with the old meteorite and risk it. Silence descended on the strange army. All gazed upwards into the blue. It actually was a gorgeous morning, fresh and light, a little wind just nodding the flowers. A lark suddenly burst into twitterings of joy till a baboon slapped it and a mongoose gave it a fierce look. They waited. Finally, God couldn't bear to wait any longer. He cupped his hands and roared upwards into space. Whoever you are, you'd better go back. I advise you to turn round and go back. We're very heavily armed and perfectly prepared. Please don't be foolish. Go and try your luck with some other creation. You haven't a hope here. There followed a moment's pause. Then the air shook. Even the air inside their mouths and inside their lungs seemed to shake. The noise was stunning. It came from everywhere. It was no longer above in space. It was in the earth, in the trees, in the air, and yes, inside each other. A most tremendous shout. Attack! Every creature had the impression that a meteor had come rushing from nowhere and it had hit them smack in the ear, of both ears, a truly shocking noise, A horrendous moment of noise. Then came dead silence. With clenched teeth, with wild popping eyes, all claws out, horn tips trembling, lips lifted from fangs, ears flattened, bodies tense and quivering. The beasts stared at each other, waiting for it. God crouched, his ears stretched very wide to miss nothing. A meteorite at the ready, another one slowly circling his head on standby. But still nothing happened. A rabbit broke down with the tension and gave a few sobs. Gradually the creatures relaxed. They blinked. They licked their dry lips. They readjusted the positions of their tails. The wolf glanced at God. God's arm lowered slightly, and he straightened. A slight frown came over his brow. Gazing round uneasily, he passed the meteorite to his left hand, pushed his right hand under his left armpit, and scratched himself. The wolf, as if imitating him, pointed its nose, flattened its ears, closed its eyes, and with one hind foot fiercely scratched the back of his ear. A cheetah, without taking its eyes off the topmost leaf of a distant tree, which had just moved the wrong way in the wind, thoughtfully lifted a hind leg and tried to scratch its belly. Then, forgetting the leaf, it sat and began to nuzzle and chew at its belly fur savagely. God was also scratching his belly, then the back of his knee. A pack of wild dogs began to scratch all together like dancers without music. Was it catching? Was it itching powder? The densely packed square of creatures was shuddering and shaking. The vultures fluffed their wings and burrowed in their feathers with their beaks. The monkeys rolled on the ground, scratching fiercely with grimacing faces. Pardon me. A badger sat, teeth bared with a blur for a hind leg. Pigs squirmed on their backs, trying to find sharp stones or twigs to scratch them. The whole army was shuddering in a disorderly heap. Every animal and bird was scratching itself or scratching its neighbour or trying to do both. And then God, scratching his belly, found what felt like a speck of grit. It twitched between his finger and thumb as he squeezed it. It was alive. He peered at it. A tiny bushy face peered out at him with two ferocious red eyes. The mouth opened, and that same tremendous voice came out. "Surrender! You are overpowered!" And the tiny thing leapt into his beard. God began to laugh. "It's a flea," he cried. "We've been invaded by fleas!" He scratched and laughed wildly. He seemed to be tickling himself, and all the creatures began to laugh and rake at their itches. And itching they scratched, and scratching they laughed, and laughing they itched and scratched, and laughed and scratched and itched, and laughed and scratched and scratched. They scattered through the woods, rubbing themselves against trees and rocks, scratching and laughing and itching and laughing and scratching. God went into his house for a bath. He was a very itchy, beleaguered baby bear. Right, I wonder if I should read one more story or go down to the shops and see if I can get some supplies. I guess it can wait another day. So here we go. The next story is called The Snag. Right from the beginning, Eel was grey, and his wife was grey, and his children were grey. Like my fucking grey neighbourhood. No imagination. Always a sign of war and depression and oppression when the population stupidly paints their entire walls and ceilings and roofs and fences grey. Insanity is what it is. Insanity started with the COVID epoch. It's how I knew things were going to get dangerous and bad. Right, grey's not my favourite colour, even though I'm turning grey with age now, and I'll have to learn to love my silver hues. It's not really my preferred colour. C'est la vie. Ageing happens to us all. I'm still time fighting though. Go to my hairdresser. She puts little foils through and makes me look a little bit blonde and spruces me up. But I can't see her till the 25th, so what's that? 15 days away. I'm going to start looking pretty fucking awful soon because I've already got a fair bit of regrowth. But you know what? It's only hair and it'll get sorted. And it's not the end of the world. Oh, smooth violin. Right. Where were we? Oh, Eel and his 2 children, his wife, all being grey. They lived in the bed of the river under a stone. There they lay, loosely folded together, Eel and his wife and 2 of his children. They breathed and they waited under a big stone. Eel could peer out. He saw the water insects skittering about over the gravel and sometimes swimming up through the water to disappear through a ring of ripples. Where did they go? He saw the bellies of the trout, the dace, the minnows, and 1 salmon hovering in the current or resting on the points of the stones on the riverbed, their fins astir endlessly. All day he lay under the dark stone. But at night, when the sun went behind the wood and the river grew suddenly dark, he slipped out. His wife and his 2 children followed him. Their noses were keener than any dog's. They could smell every insect. They rootled into the gravel of the river pool, nipping up the insects. But wherever he went over the riverbed, he heard the cry, "Here comes the grey snake! Look out for the grey snake! The grey snake is out! Watch for your babies!" The fish could see him. Even in the dark, the fish, with their luminous eyes, could see him very well. They darted close to see him better. "Here he is!" piped a trout in a thin treble voice. "He's coming upstream. Horrible Eyes is coming upstream." And then, "Here he is!" chattered the minnows. "He's turning back downstream." Wherever he moved, the fish kept up their cries. "Here's the grey snake now. Here he comes. Watch your babies." Eel pretended not to care. He poked his nose under the pebbles, picking out the insects. But the endless pestering got on his nerves, and his 2 children were frightened. "We're not snakes," he would shout. "We may be grey, but we're fish." Then all the fish began to laugh, so the river pool shook. "Fish are silver," they cried, "or green, or gold, or speckled with pinky fins. Fish are beautiful. Fish have scales. They are shaped like fish. But you are grey. You have no scales, and you are a snake. Snake, 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 snake." They would begin to chant it all together, opening and closing their mouths. And Eel and his wife and children would finally glide back under their stone and lie hidden. In a few minutes the fish would forget about them. If there had been anywhere else to go, Eel would have gone there to escape the fish of that pool. Once he did take his wife downstream to a much bigger, deeper pool, but that was worse. Nearly 30 big salmon lay there, as well as many trout and dace and minnows. The salmon had shattering voices. They were used to calling to each other out on the stormy high seas, and now when Eel came slithering from under a stone when night fell, a deafening chorus met him. "Here comes the grey snake. Here he comes to eat your children. Here he comes. Watch out." And all the time he was hunting, they kept it up. "Go home, grey snake. Go home, grey snake." Finally, Eel led his family back to the smaller pool, where there was only one salmon. His 2 children stopped going out at night. They lay curled up under the stone, crying. "What are we?" they sobbed. "Are we really grey snakes? If we aren't fish, what are we?" Eel scowled and tried to comfort them, but he couldn't help worrying. What if I'm a grey snake after all? How can I prove I'm a fish? Eel had only one friend, a lamprey. Lamprey was quite like Eel, but he was so ugly. He didn't worry about anything. "I know I'm a horror," he would say, "but so what? Being ugly makes you smart." One day this lamprey said to Eel, "I know a fortune teller. She could tell you what you are. Why don't you ask her?" Eel reared up like a swan. "A fortune teller?" he cried. Why didn't you tell me? I've told you, said Lamprey. This fortune teller, it turned out, was the new moon. How can the new moon tell fortunes? Asked Eel. She tells fortunes only for a few minutes each day, explained Lamprey. You have to get to her just as she touches the sea's edge, going down. Then she tells fortunes until she sinks out of sight. You have to listen very carefully. You don't hear her with your ears. You hear her with your thoughts. Let's go, said Eel, and he wanted to set off that minute downstream, but Lamprey checked him. Take a witness, said Lamprey. A witness? Asked Eel. What for? Unless you have a witness to what the new moon says, the fish will never believe you. Take the salmon. The salmon was so sure the new moon would tell Eel he was really a snake and not a fish at all, that he was eager to come. Why is my hair all funny? Why is it all funny, people of Earth? It's because I'm not well. When I'm not well, my hair does funny things, very odd, peculiar things, almost as if it's a life of its own. Just zhuzh it up a bit and not care. I've never been one to fuss over hair. That's why I go to the hairdresser once every 8 weeks. I look glamorous for approximately 24 hours and then it goes all to hell in a handbasket. I'm not one to sit and primp and preen, says she, primping and preening. But it is a bit dry and weird too. Anyway, where were we? Let's return to the story. Dear Goddess. I want to hear that, he cried. I'll bring the truth back. Then you can stay out there in the sea. You needn't come back at all. It's the truth we want, not you. So they set off. It was quite a journey, getting to the new moon. But finally, Eel got there with Lamprey beside him to keep his spirits up and skulking behind the salmon. The new moon was actually a smile without a face. It lay on the sea's rim like a face on a pillow. And the smile smiled as Eel told his problem. It smiled as it sank slowly. You are a fish, said the smile. Not only are you a fish, you are a fish that God made for himself. God made you for himself. Me? Cried Eel. God made me for himself? Why? Because, said the smile, you are the sweetest of all the fish. I beg to differ on that. He's obviously never met a conger eel writhing out of the ocean with all their layers of teeth. Ooh! Still traumatised all these decades later. Anyway, where were we? The salmon slammed the water. Someone just said perhaps he might have been sweet before you put him in a life-threatening situation, dragging him out of the sea. This is true, but I didn't do it, was my idiot ex-husband. Got no intention of fishing conger eels. Found it an abhorrent thing. Abhorrent beyond belief. Anyway, where were we? Sorry, I had to digress there. The salmon, I know, slammed the water with his tail. He'd always thought he was the sweetest. This was bad news on top of bad news. "Say that again," cried the eel. "You are the sweetest of all the fish," said the smile. He spoke so loud the whole sea chimed like a gong with the words. Eel didn't know what to say. "Thank you," he stammered. "Oh, thank you." He was thinking how his children would jump up and down as much as they could under their rock when he told them this. "But," said the smile, as it sank, it seemed to be sinking faster and faster. There was only a little horn of light left, a little bright thorn sticking above the sea. "But," cried the eel. "But what?" "There's a snag," said the smile, and vanished. "What snag? What's the snag?" cried Eel. But the smile had gone. The sea looked darker and colder. A shoal of flying fish. I've seen flying fish out at sea. They're lovely. A shoal of flying fish burst upwards with a shivering laugh and splashed back in again. Still, Eel had what he wanted, and both lamprey and salmon were witnesses. Salmon had already gone, furious, as eel and lamprey set off home. Back in the pool, Eel called all the fish together and told them exactly what had been said. "I am a fish," he said. "Not only that, I am God's favourite fish. God made me for himself because among the fish I am the sweetest." "It is true," said the lamprey. "I was there." "Yes," said the salmon. "Perhaps she did say that. But what did she mean? That's what I'd like to know. What did she mean?" Even so, the fish were impressed. They didn't like it that they were impressed. And from that moment, Eel and his wife and children surged around the pool throughout the day as well as the night. "Make way for God's own fish," he would shout, and butt the salmon. "Make way for the sweetest." The fish didn't know what to do. The story soon got about. The heron and the kingfisher told it to the birds. The otter told it to the animals. A crowd of them came to Man and told him what had happened. Man, who was drinking very sour cider, which he had just made out of crab apples, pondered. "What," he said finally, "does the eel mean by sweetest? How sweetest? Sweetest what? Sweetest nature?" All the creatures became thoughtful. Then they became wildly excited. "Man's got it," they cried. "What does the horrible eel mean by sweetest? Sweetest how?" The fish came crowding around Eel and his family. "Sweetest what?" they shouted. "How are you sweetest? Come and prove you're the sweetest, you and your hideous infants. You and your goblin wife. It's a riddle, said the salmon. The new moon posed a riddle. What does sweetest mean? We are sweeter than any eel, cried the flowers, and the wild roses and the honeysuckles poured their perfumes over the river. And we are sweeter than any dumb eel, cried the thrushes, the blackbirds, the robins, the wrens, and they poured out their brilliant songs over the river. And my children are the sweetest of all the animals, cried the otter, holding up its kittens. They are not, cried the sheep, and she butted forward her 2 lambs. No, they are not, cried the fox, suddenly standing there with a woolly cub. Among the fish, cried the eel. That's what she said. I am the sweetest among the fish. Who cares about perfumes? Who wants to smell? And who cares about song? What counts is the thought. And who cares about fluffy darlings? The otter grows up to murder eels. The lamb grows up to butcher the flowers. The fox cub grows up to murder the mice. What sort of sweetness is that? No, my sweetness is the real sweetness, the sort that God loves best. Taste? Asked Man. That leaves only taste. Eel would have blinked if he had had eyelids. Taste? He hadn't thought of that. That's it, shouted the fish, sticking their heads out of the water. Taste! Cook us and eat us. See who's the sweetest. Taste us all. Taste us all. Eel felt suddenly afraid. Who was going to taste him? Was Man going to cook him? But the fish was shouting to Man, you can eat one of each of us, and then eat eel as well, and then you can judge. Here we are, here we are. The fish were quite ready to let one of each kind of them be eaten, so long as it meant that eel too would be eaten. No, cried Eel. Wait. But fish were jumping ashore. One trout, one dace, one minnow, and even that salmon, he too was offering himself, all to get the eel killed and eaten. Eel twisted round and fled, but the otter plunged in after him, and in the swirling chase, the otter grabbed Eel's wife. She was much bigger than Eel anyway. Eel coiled under the stone with his 2 children. He couldn't believe it. The oven was glowing, the fish were frying, and his wife too. It was terrible, but all he could do was stare and feel helpless. And man and woman were already testing with dainty forks and thin slices of buttered brown bread. They didn't like dace at all. He tasted of mud. The minnow was quite nice, but peculiar. Dear goddess. The trout was fairly good, but a little too watery. He needed lemon and something. And the salmon now, well, the salmon seemed just about the most wonderful thing possible, till they tasted eel. Woman uttered a cry and almost dropped her fork. Tears came into her eyes and she stared at man. Was there ever anything so delicious, she gasped. So sweet, so sweet. Man rested his brow on his hand. How have we lived, so long, he said, and not realized what gorgeous goodies lay down there under the river stones? How could anything be sweeter than this eel? Eel, he shouted, you have won. God is right again. You are the sweetest. Eel heard and trembled, and he shrank back under the stone, deeper into the dark, when he heard man say, bring me another. Otter came swirling down through the current. Otter was working for man. Eel and his 2 children shot downstream, but one had to be hindmost, one of the children, and when Eel looked round, only one of his children was following, and as they slipped and squirmed down through the shallows, among the stones, towards the next pool below, the heron peered down out of heaven and swack! The other eel child was twisting in heron's long bill. The heron too was working for man. But the eels were so sweet, neither otter nor heron could resist eating them on the spot. From that moment, the otter hid from man and spent all his time hunting more eels for himself. And from that moment, heron was afraid of man, flapping and excuse me, reeling away with a panicky "ah!" only to land somewhere else where he could go on hunting eels for himself. Neither otter nor heron wanted to hand over what they caught. Eels were much too sweet. But Eel himself hid from all of them. He oiled his body to make it hard to grip, and whenever he sees the slightest glow of light, he hides deeper under the stones or deeper into the mud. He thinks it is man searching for him, or he thinks it is the point of the moon sinking as he suddenly remembers the snag. Yes, the snag. And here is a picture of the moon sinking down on the horizon, perfectly reflected by the ocean below. Sweet, isn't it? Right, on that note, I need a little rest now. look after my lungs and rest. So, wherever you are in the space-time continuum, stay safe, stay happy, stay wild and free, and those of you involved in clean-up after being flooded out, my condolences to you. It's going to be a long, bumpy ride for many of you. And Australia, man, Australia, the not so lucky country, especially with these constant, repetitive, I believe personally often manufactured by HAARP superstorms. Cyclone Alfred was weird. I actually thought it was a hoax for the first couple of days because it kept teasing by coming in and going out, coming in and going out, like doing the hokey pokey. But when it finally hit, the wind lasted for about 3 or 4 hours, and it was actually the rain that caused the most damage. Flooding. So sometimes you're an eel, sometimes you're a salmon, sometimes you're a lamprey, but at the end, man devours it all and then wonders what happens when he runs out of resources. Greedy man, greedy, corrupt man. But we mustn't think about that now. We've got lives to carry on with and people to fall in love with and aspirations and goals to dream about or even achieve, homes to make clean and ready and better and stronger than ever before, and life goes on. Bye for now, planet Earth. Take good care, be of good cheer. Never ever let the bastards grind us down. Am I right? I'm right. Bye for now.